Today I'm going to compare the Sony 10-18mm F4 versus the Sigma 16mm 1.4, and I'm going to go over photos and videos as well as which one you should buy. Let's start with photography and the Sigma lens. The Sigma 16mm is a full frame field of view equivalent of 24mm, and at f1.4 it makes it a perfect wide angle portrait lens. Now I really wouldn't shoot portraits any wider than this because shooting wide angle portraits really distort body parts and stuff, so you gotta be very mindful of shooting wide angle portraits. Even though it's harder to get a blurry background with a wide angle lens, being at f1.4 does make this lens have noticeable background blur. This lens is super sharp and it has a very small minimum focus distance, but it is not stabilized, so when you're trying to shoot handheld at slow shutter speeds, it won't help you with that. You're gonna need a tripod. Now for the Sony 10-18, it has a full frame field of view equivalent of 15 to 27. So that is very wide, and I really wouldn't consider shooting portraits this wide, and being at only f4 you won't get much noticeable background blur. But where this lens does shine is when you're trying to shoot like landscapes and cityscapes and inside houses and car interiors and stuff like that. Anywhere we need a very wide field of view. And for things like that, you probably don't really want a shallow depth of field because you're going to be shooting at between f8 and f11 anyway. So that eliminates the advantage the Sigma has of shooting at f1.4 because you won't be using it anyway. And plus the Sony lens will give you an advantage of being able to shoot from 10mm all the way to 18mm, and it's stabilized. So for portraits, low light, and shallow depth of field, the Sigma wins. But for everything else, the Sony wins. Now these advantages and disadvantages does translate over to video as well. The Sigma has more background blur and will be better in low light, but the Sony gives you more versatility with the range of 10 to 18 and the advantage of being stabilized. And most of the time when I'm shooting video, I'm shooting at about f4 or higher anyway. So f1.4 and other low apertures like that only are going to apply when you need a shallow depth of field or if you're shooting in low light. And that's only sometimes, because even if you're shooting in low light, you still might need a nice deep depth of field. So that doesn't even always apply in low light either. The Sony lens has a constant f4 aperture, so no matter what focal length you got the lens zoomed in on, the aperture won't change. Unlike the kit lens, which is a 16 to 50mm that goes from a 3.5 aperture to a 5.6. So it changes as you zoom in. This lens does not do that. It stays at a constant f4. Now being that the kit lens starts at 16mm, a lot of us have seen what 16mm looks like on these cameras. Now the 6mm difference might not seem like that big of a deal, but 10mm is a look that very few lenses will be able to give you on this camera. Now both of these lenses can be considered vlogging lenses, and this is what the Sigma 16mm looks like at f1.4. And this is what the 10-18 looks like, so it's pretty much a matter of personal preference. Some people might like the wide field of view of the 10-18 and some might like the shallow depth of field of the Sigma 16mm. So whichever one you think looks best, that's the one you should go for. You might also assume that because you have a 16mm that you can just back up a few feet and get the same look as a 10mm, and that's not the case. 10mm and 16mm will look different no matter how close or how far away you're standing from the subject. So the $1 million question, which one should you buy? I would pretty much always recommend the Sigma 16mm. First off, the Sony 10-18 is an $800 lens. So I would only recommend it if the advantages of the Sony is critical to you. The Sigma will do just fine in the majority of situations. If you're into a lot of portrait work or low light stuff and you need a wide angle lens, go with the Sigma. If you're looking for a wide angle video lens, or you do a lot of landscape photography or cityscapes or vlogging or things like that, then you might want to get the Sony. So even though both of these lenses are wide angle lenses, I think they cater to two different types of people. And at the end of the day, they are both great lenses. It just depends on what you need for the job that you need to get done. I hope this video was helpful. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys next time.